Hello, we are here today to share some information on National History Day for Arizona, the 2023 theme workshop. We're here to help you get started on your projects, and we're here to support you. Let me introduce you to the cast of people that are going to help you throughout this journey. My name is Dr. Kristen Rex. I'm the Vice President of Education Programs. We have Allison Avery, who will be helping you out of the Tempe Museum. Jenny Pennington comes to you from the Yuma area, and Janie Adams is going to support you from the Tucson Museum. She is here to help. She has done this in the past, and she knows what's going on. So feel free to reach out to these people. National History Day has a theme, and it's important to have a theme because a theme helps you focus. There is a lot of history out there, and so we want to help support you with your projects moving forward to help you really drill down and have a good idea of what you want to defend or create. And so a theme is going to help you get there. Your project needs to relate to the theme. I cannot express this enough. You have to be able to argue your topic. You have to show how it relates to the theme. And it's very important, after all this hard work that you do, you're going to produce a product that you want to be very convincing to the judges that leads us all the way back to the theme. Consider your 2019 theme. It was called Breaking Barriers in History. Is the first person really the person who broke the barrier? What is the barrier? As an expert, you're going to be able to tell us what you mean. Take this as an opportunity to focus on your theme.
And then just a quick aside, from my perspective as a historian, speaking of kinds of definitions and terminology and concepts, so you as the historian have the opportunity to define what you mean by barrier in that circumstance, or in this year's circumstance, frontier. You get to tell us what it means. So speaking as a historian, that is what we call a concept or terminology. So historical concepts or terms, things like manifest destiny, frontier, border, things like that, tell the reader that you understand the body of work that came before you and that your topic is in conversation with the work of historians who have studied similar topics, right? It's very important that you remember to define what you mean by frontier, by border, by any kind of concept like that, and to cite that material. So if you're going to use the term manifest destiny, you need to have a citation for that. All of that stuff is different from jargon. Jargon is language that is specific to a field of study, and it's so specialized in that field of study that a normal person wouldn't understand what you were saying. So if you include complex historical ideas like discursively imbricated ontologies, you need to unpack that for your reader, right? It's really important to remember that, yeah, some of your judges are going to be history professors or history experts, but some of your judges are just going to be regular people. So your audience is your teachers, historians, field experts, and the general public. So it's very important that we choose words that assert our expert knowledge on a topic, but we don't pick words that are so difficult that the average person wouldn't be able to understand.
Now, National History Day, because this is done locally and state by state, they have to have a common thread. And that common thread is the rubric. You have to have the ability to not just mention your theme at the beginning of your project and then never mention it again. It is so important that you weave and you're able to talk about your topic and how it aligns to the theme. And the best way to judge, as Janie said, we have judges from all different walks of life. It's not the same judges at every single event. So they use a rubric. And the rubric is what's going to help you understand what the expectation is for the project. Rubrics are great because they offer feedback on your project. They'll help you see where you did well. They'll help you find target areas that you can possibly improve upon if you make it to the state level or even the national level. But more importantly, it gives you feedback on the hard work that you did. Be sure to use the rubric throughout your process.
Yeah, and remember that the theme is a specific criteria on the rubric, right? So it's not just, oh, I'm going to mention the theme in my introduction and then throw it out the window, right? The theme is central because the theme is the lens through which you are viewing the historical past, right? So remember that a Superior National History Day project weaves the annual theme throughout the entirety of the project. So even if you have a stellar project, if your project has an unclear connection to the theme, it will only ever be ranked as a fair project. And just to reiterate what Dr. Rex said, ask to see the rubric. The rubric is available on our website, National History Day in Arizona, and on the National History Day website.
Your rubric is your friend.
It very much is. And your rubric also helps keep the judges honest, right? It's very important to remember as we're kind of exploring the past, which is made up of individuals who are as complicated and unique as you are, that they have as much bias too. Judges are people, and people have bias, right? So the rubric helps us put our own personal interests, our own personal bias aside and judge fairly. All right, so without further ado, the 2023 NHDAZ theme is Frontiers in History, People, Places, and Ideas. And as an expert on Arizona history, I am fascinated by this theme because I am fascinated by the concept of a frontier. And frontier is a concept, right? It's not just a word you can throw out in a sentence. It means something. It's loaded. When you call something a frontier, you are taking a very specific view on that event, on that place, on that person. So we're going to spend a little bit of time unpacking the word frontier and understanding what it means in context of the theme. If you want to watch the NHDAZ theme video, which I highly recommend, or read the National History Day theme narrative booklet, again, highly recommend it. All of those things are going to be at nhd.org/theme. It's got a lot of really great ideas for projects. It's got a lot of really great ideas for where to get information and how to get started. So if you are absolutely struggling and don't know what to do, we'll talk about that a little later in our presentation. But for right now, just start with reading the theme book.
They really go deep into the discussion and definition. I thought they did a nice job this year because it's kind of a big topic.
Yeah, and historians read. So, all right. So what is a frontier? I'm sure you've heard space, the final frontier, Alaska, the final frontier, right? Frontier is one of those words that people throw around, but it's a word that has so much meaning because it really emphasizes a particular viewpoint. So let's talk a little bit about frontier. So frontiers can be physical or imagined boundaries between communities or nations. They can be the limit of knowledge or achievement or the edge of massive change. So a frontier is an edge of something, right? And usually when we talk about frontiers, I'll keep using space, the final frontier as an example. That implies that we don't know what's on the other side of that edge, right? It suggests that whatever is beyond the frontier is an unknown, is scary, is something for concern, or maybe even excitement. I think it's important to remember that anxiety and excitement are the same emotion. But frontier suggests that there's like an unknown. But is it always an unknown? Is it unknown to a specific person? Is it unknown to a specific group? What ideas, which people, who are we leaving out when we call something a frontier, right? A really good example, to keep using Star Trek, according to the lore of Star Trek, Space the Final Frontier, there's no way that's a frontier because all of those different aliens live out in space. They know that they're there. And just because the folks from Earth don't know that they're there doesn't mean that they're not, right? So frontier is one of those words in our language that is so heavy with connotation, so heavy with meaning, that it is up to you as the historian to unpack what it is that you mean by frontier. So this is a historiographical example of frontier. So historiography is the history of history. It's the study of how we write about history and how the way that we've written about history changes over time. So this is from the introduction to a book called Power Lines, which is about Phoenix and the electrification of the Southwest. And in this introduction, the author, Andrew Needham, spends a really long time thinking about frontier, primarily because there are all these conceptual ideas surrounding the history of Arizona and frontiers, and he lists several of them. He talks about the metropolitan frontier, the crabgrass frontier, edge cities, right? Something being right on the edge. He talks about the Frederick Jackson Turner thesis. The Turner thesis very much associated with Manifest Destiny and the movement west, right? So there's this idea in Arizona history that Arizona is on the edge of something. But that question of what that something is really, really important. And what Needham is going to argue in this book is by situating Arizona as the edge of civilization, you leave out everyone who does not live in one of those major metropolitan centers in Arizona. And ultimately, Needham goes on to make an argument in the book that the electrification and modernization of Phoenix comes at the direct expense of the Navajo Nation. So that's why it's so important that you unpack these ideas, right? Frontier is not just a word that you can throw out because it's suggesting these two opposites. It's suggesting civilization on one side and savagery or unknownness on the other side. So that's a really good example and a follow-up question to think about, to take all of those ideas and condense them. What happens to the history of a place like Phoenix or the history of places in Arizona when we call it a frontier? And what does it mean to move beyond that frontier? What does it mean to reconsider the frontier history of a place like Arizona? So these are big historical questions that you are going to start answering during the course of your project. I know they sound very scary and very like open-ended and really big questions. But as you start to pick apart your primary sources and understand what's really going on here and have an interpretation for what's really going on here, they will all begin to make sense. Okay, so there are three major components here that we need to talk about. There is the historical argument or your thesis statement, the theme, and your topic. So any historical argument for National History Day and generally must do the following. It needs to convincingly argue a connection to the annual theme, right? So you need to be able to convincingly tell me what a frontier is, how is it a frontier, how does that impact the way that we think about it? And then you need to define what you think a frontier is in the context of your project, right? So if you're writing about the Wild West, that's one thing. If you're writing about frontiers during the Civil Rights Movement, that's another thing, right? So it needs to be within the context of your project. And then always, always, always remember that an exemplary project has the annual theme interwoven throughout, and not or, and has a convincing argument that makes a point. You have to make a point. Historians, a lot of people who go to school to become historians end up becoming lawyers because historians are very, very good at logic puzzles and they're very, very good at making an argument, right? So you have to make a point. And then one last thing to consider when we're thinking about topic choice, when does a topic become historical? And that's something that happens a lot, right? Some people believe that something has to be 50 years old to be historical. But there are some things that are undeniably historical that have happened in the recent past, like 9/11, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Fukushima disaster. All of these things are history-making moments. So you are free to do any topic that you want to do, but you need to be able to contextualize the event under study, right? That's what history does. History looks at the context and looks at the long and short-term effects of that event to understand what it means, right? History is not about who, what, when, where. It's about why, and it's about how. Those two things are key. So if you want to do your project on the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit movement, maybe you want to end with that. Maybe you want to end with that as a consequence of the impact of intimate violence on the Western frontier, right? So we're never saying to not end with something that you're passionate about, even if it is from the fairly recent past. What we are saying is maybe instead of thinking of that as the beginning, we think of that as the end. And we understand what things led up to this event.
All right. Let's get started. How do you get those ideas into a working thesis? We all know that we do better when we work on something we like, or we have a relationship with, or if we have an interest to. So taking your personal interests can help motivate you. Taking your personal interests can help springboard that idea. Taking something that means something to you is going to help you create the best project. So don't be afraid to take a passion that you have and run with it. And it might be in a totally unique way, and you didn't even know you thought about it until you started digging into those primary sources and learning and reading and asking those questions. For example, if you're a sports person, you can talk about the progressive era, late 1800s, 1900s of women's history. If you need help coming up with an idea, start with your teacher, go to a librarian, but more importantly, you can bounce ideas off people that have done this before. You are not alone. You can send an email to us and we can give you a call, or we can just ask you more open-ended questions that will help guide you into your thought process that's going to eventually help you come up with something. Sports to progressive women's history. Next thing you know, you can talk about Title IX, equal rights. All these things can be interwoven. Don't be afraid to start one place and possibly end up somewhere completely different.
Yeah, never throw anything away. So if you have a document and you're like, man, this project is going nowhere, do not delete it. Call it History Day Project Draft 1, save it, put it somewhere safe. Because you might need to come back to it eventually when you find that cornerstone primary source and you go, oh, wait, I was on the right track. I just needed something to help me get along.
And this is how you can start pulling your communication in history. You have key understandings, you have women's history. You start with your theme, and then you have some general interest, and then you start broad, but then you'll slowly narrow. Don't throw out any ideas, because no bad idea is a bad idea until you've tapped every resource and not been able to find something, because you might find some hidden nugget as you research that's going to help you develop those very important questions that will help springboard your project.
Yeah, it's not a report, it's an argument, right? So if I wanted just a Wikipedia article on the Seneca Falls Convention, I could do that myself. But I want to know why. I want to know why any of this happened, and I want to know why you think any of this happened. I have my own opinion as a historian, but I want to hear your opinion as a historian. So I know we're all thinking to ourselves, gosh, frontiers in history, what about Arizona history? And I'm just going to make a plug for Arizona history here. It's going to be a shameless plug. I really encourage you to do a local history project. And there are so many reasons why, but I'm going to let you in on a little secret. The projects that win at nationals, the projects that place in the top 5 at the national contest, have archival primary source research in them. Not just NARA, not just the Library of Congress online, not just a Google search. They have kids who put on their shoes and they go down to their local library to look at archival materials. Additionally, I think the judges are kind of tired of the same old topics, right? So it's important that we spice it up and we liven it up. And additionally, it's going to show that you understand the historical process. So that's my little plug for local history. And I want to give you some things to think about if you're thinking about Arizona history and National History Day. So on the NHDAZ website, which is on the Historical Society website, I have written a short little blog post for you that kind of explores different frontiers in Arizona history. And of course, we have the frontiers that we always talk about, right? We always talk about the Indian wars and cowboys and things like that. And those are definitely topics that you can pursue, right? You can pursue them with a different lens, with a different frame of perspective. So I just wanted to throw out some ideas. So one is Arizona still a frontier? Who is a pioneer and why? How are frontiers created, crossed, or rebuilt, right? So for example, we always hear all these stories about Anglo-American women settling and taming the Wild West. But were they crossing frontiers of gender and sexuality? Or were they using established gender roles to exert power, right? In a situation where they maybe would have not had power. We talk about the closing of the frontier and the end of the American Indian Wars, but a lot of that work was done by Buffalo soldiers. Did those Buffalo soldiers open a new frontier for themselves, moving out of the South and away from the East Coast and coming to the West? If you're interested in geographical frontiers, you might consider missions and presidios, the US-Mexico border, or borders between native nations. How are the geographical borders also religious or political borders? How do people cross them and what happens next? Can you find ways that people work together across social frontiers? And of course, if science is more your thing and you're thinking about, well, how do people cross the frontiers of science? Did you know that Pluto was originally discovered in Arizona? How do people live in a hot, dry climate like Arizona? People have been living here for tens of thousands of years, and it's been a desert for tens of thousands of years. How did they do it? How did they make it happen? Maybe you're interested in exploring the future of science and you want to look at things like Arcosanti and the biosphere, right? So there are lots of different ways to engage with Arizona history, and I really encourage you to, at the very least, think about it.
Remember, frontiers is very open. It can be people, it can be how people impacted. Once people went and impacted, did it end becoming a frontier? It could be a place. You have so much you can dig and delve into. Don't be afraid to just go for it. I think the most important thing is nobody wants to hear for the 5,000th time about a certain topic. Make it yours. Make it your own unique way of explaining, and like Janie said, arguing your point, using those facts to say, nope, this is why it is, and this is how it is, and most importantly, as evidenced by.
And I think if you're struggling to do that, the best way to get over that is to do some pre-writing. And I know, I was a gifted student too, and I don't have to pre-write. I don't have to pre-write. Pre-writing is not for me. Pre-writing is for you, I promise. So don't forget that National History Day provides a graphic organizer every year that relates to the theme to help you think through some of these big questions. If you're really struggling on, well, what is a frontier and how do I unpack it?
Also, you might want to consider, your teacher might want to guide you and to pick a topic based on something that you're learning about in class at the time. Working with your teacher as a partnership is important. If you have a syllabus for your specific class, be sure to use that, because there's already some sources that that teacher can help you with, and then you can go into that next layer or level. There are different rules. The NHD contest has very specific rules. And you, as the student who's developing your project, you need to make sure that your project follows what you are needing to do in the classroom, but also what you need to do if you're going to submit it to actually be scored with a rubric, judged, and possibly go from the regional to the state or even the national NHD event. Ooh, final tips. Knowing that you're gonna read. Let's just be honest. You just, at first it seems a little overwhelming. Just start reading. Be open to all different kinds of articles or ways of learning about your topic. Start pulling that little thread and follow it. Archives are available. Here's the shameless plug for the Arizona Historical Society. We are the repository for some of the most interesting information for the state of Arizona. We have thousands, hundreds of thousands of articles and photos and journals, and just, we have plenty that can help you with your topic. Understanding that you're already learning in your classroom many of the skills that you'll need to do your project, but NHD, what it's giving you is just, it's giving you the freedom to do the project on your terms and not just being spoon-fed information. So I see it as this fantastic opportunity. You're learning skills that are aligning to what you're supposed to be learning in your classroom anyways, but make this learning yours. Make this some project-based learning that you are going to dig deep and enjoy the process.
And this is where your librarians are going to be really helpful. So some materials are going to be behind a paywall. Some materials are going to be inaccessible because of COVID still, or international travel. Some materials are going to be inaccessible because they're too sensitive, right? For example, some records belonging to various indigenous groups, they're not going to allow you to see. So it's important to keep an open mind, to work with your librarians, and to get a sense of what's actually available. And then always remember your historical context. We think about history sometimes as like individual pearls on a necklace, but we actually need to be thinking about history more like a tapestry. And these events are connected in interesting and sometimes very, very strange ways. So when you're thinking about context, ask yourself, why is this happening when it's happening and not 100 years prior or 100 years after? What perfect cosmic soup is occurring in that moment to get this event that you're looking for, and why? Help, I don't know what I'm doing.
That's your lifeline. You reach out. This is an email that all of us have access to, all of us check daily. And you throw out questions, and we can sometimes answer it in an email, or we can set up a time to talk. As we get closer to the events, we can have some office hours set up where you can just reach out, and we can have maybe an open meeting or something where you can pop in and say, here's where I'm at, and I am stuck. What can I do to help me push through this and get to the other side?
Yeah, there's never a stupid question. Sometimes there are inappropriate questions, but rarely are they stupid, just poorly timed.
Perfect.
All right. So save this email address and good luck. We'll see you at regionals.